Thanks everyone for turning up. I always love it when a photographer introduces their talk by describing a beautiful connection they have had from an early age with their photography, like their favourite aunt or uncle gave them a camera when they were 8 and it started a lifelong affair with photography. I think it's a really romantic notion, but I have nothing like that to tell about my photography. But I do have a connection with bookmaking. And I'm going to ask you to think about whether it counts or not. So my grandfather was a bookmaker. He's long, long gone. His name was Tom Green. And the book he had tallied all the bets he took at the racetrack, where he was in fact a bookmaker. That's all I've got in terms of connection to bookmaking. But let's be clear that tonight is not about that sort of bookmaking. It's about handmade books. And some of the images, some of the books you'll see on the image on the screen now, you'll get to see a little bit about what's inside those books. All of the books, except for this little one over here, in the very left-hand corner of the screen, are all handmade. And that one is self-published and printed by an online provider. And I'm going to raise that one for a specific reason. So you'll get to see tonight some of the books. Now, not all those books have photos in them, but they all have something in them. And I guess you're probably more interested in the handmade photo books. When I was learning to do this many years ago, they were called artist books. And if you Google that, you'll see the most amazing artist books. Now, they're not books about artists. They're books that house works of art, which is what your images are. And artist books generally have been very popular with people who do printmaking, and they might do limited edition prints, and they'll put, 10 or 12 into a book. So that's the experience that I've known with artist books. If you think of a book as a vessel that houses works of art, then the book also can take on a different structure from a traditional book, which has a front and back cover and a spine. And so that might be something that you'll see tonight, in that the book actually won't be a traditional looking book. The other area, umbrella term that a lot of this fits under is book arts. And I know there are some amazing centres for book arts throughout the world, particularly one in New York City, and London has one too. So you could also look up book arts and see some amazing stuff. So let's have a look now. I'm going to give you a quick question. Over here, I've put a question mark on this book. It's 18.5 centimetres long, about 10 centimetres high. I don't know, about 7 centimetres deep. And I want you to have a guess how many images might be in that book, and when the book is flattened and stretched out, how long it might be. And we'll get to it soon. Just something to have a guess. What's that?
Any takers?
They can just perhaps write in. We'll get to it in a few minutes.
Okay.
So if you want to write your answer in, you can, or I can tell you later, but just think about it, just something to think about. Many of you might put your image in a frame. That's how you're housing it in a frame. I like to house them in books because I find it really convenient. If I want to look at them, I can. If I don't want to look at it, I can just fold it up and put it in the bookshelf. So that's one of the reasons I really like doing this. All right, let's have a look. So tonight, this is a new slide, just checking, Julia.
Yes, it's all good.
Great. Okay, so tonight I want to do 3 topics. The first one, I want to show you 6 handmade books, all images, of course, and then one that's self-published in a traditional form of photo book. And then I'm just going to show you not how to do an easy book structure, but perhaps the components of an easy book structure. And you'll see quite a few of them in the first topic. And then finally, Julia asked me to talk a little bit about image editing. That's not Lightroom editing, that's the sequence or selection and sequence of images that you would put into a book, whatever format it takes. But I use 3 S's. So another thing I'd like you to think about is what the other S might be. And that's what we'll do. All right, the images you can see on that page on the left of the screen, that's just a selection. I have a vertical bookshelf and they're a range of handmade books. Some have photos, some are like travel journals, a whole mixture. And on the right, that was an unsuccessful work in progress. When I do handmade books, I make lots because I'm never quite sure what's going to work best. And we'll talk a bit about that too. All right, well, let's have a look at some handmade books. I've numbered them all, the 7 of them, just in case you have a specific question and you want to reference it to ask it. So this is the first one. That's it on the table. That's when the book is opened. Well, that's when the outer book, which is the box, is opened, and inside then is artwork. So that is an artist book. It is called a flag book. It's a flag structure. And YouTube can help you with how to do those. The box is called a clamshell box. And those prints I did, they're just lino cut. I was learning how to do lino cut prints. And honestly, instead of, after a time tossing them out, which I would have done normally, put them into a book, and they're just a small book and it can sit on a shelf. So it's quite portable too and easy to share. So that's the first one. Let's have a look at the second one. It's also a flag book, but this one has photos in it. Now that's the spine. It's an exposed spine. And that's what it looks like inside the book. And that spine that you can see here, if you look here at the bottom of that third image, that's it opening up. And then this is what it looks like. It's nearly a metre. I was surprised. It's nearly a metre long and it can be hung if you want to on the wall. But also very conveniently can be folded up. And they are abstract architectural images I just chopped up.
Yeah.
Had them printed externally. I chopped them up and then I made them into a flag book. So it's very sculptural. And really the feel you get from these books is when you touch them and when you engage with them. They're very playful.
It's fantastic.
So,
it's
that's good.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I just like the colour. This was before I started street photography. I was just walking the streets with my camera, to be clear, and my camera was my phone, and that was sort of, it was just, I was practicing walking for some walks I was doing overseas. So really the two just worked hand in hand.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've seen a flag book. 2 flag books. And now let's look at this one. This is the one I asked you earlier, if anyone wanted to have stab at how many images,
Well, no one
and how
said
long.
anything.
No one. Okay.
No.
Anyone want to have a go now?
No.
I'm going to say 10 meters.
Okay, good. Thanks, Marie, for having the stab. Well, it's just over 15 meters long,
Oh.
and and there are over 150 images.
Wow.
So
Wow.
for a tiny, and look, the images I'll show you in a minute, but for a tiny little book that you can put in your shelf when you don't want to look at it anymore, or you want to have a break, it's just so convenient. So this is what it looks like on the inside. And that's the little, it's called a case, I think that's what I made. I think it's called a case. And it just sits in that. And it's so happy on my shelf. Now, the images really tonight aren't that important. I don't think. Obviously, they are overall, but if in case you wanted to know, they're my feet on different surfaces around the world. And I call them footies, and they now have their own Instagram page. Once I found out that I wasn't the only weirdo, and that there are heaps of people in the world that they all call them different things, and there's heaps of people that do it. So I felt quite confident then to admit that I have been doing it for a long time. It just started, I don't know, really, just organically. I had no idea what made me do it. Probably matching shoes with the carpet wherever I was standing. It would be that silly. So anyway, I've got hundreds of these. Yeah.
Lou, what's the Instagram feed?
What is it? Footies by Weezer. It's actually listed on my normal Instagram page.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So,
And yes, Footies by Weezer, which is my nickname, Weasa. Anyway, the point I think is that so many images, and it can be hung as well. But that's a lot to get in a tiny little box.
it is.
This is now a concertina fold, which is pretty straightforward. And we'll look more closely at it in the second topic.
So Lou, just one question. When you do spread it out, like, do you spread it out all at once, or do you just spread bits of it out?
Okay, so on the shelf, I usually take an inch or two out of the box and leave the majority of the books in the box and just spread them out in the shelf. When I take it out, I make all different shapes. I haven't thought about it too much. It's just something I do if I like the shape. I'll put it on a tabletop and have it in a full circle. It's too long for my apartment, so it goes out the front door if I have it out flat. But you wouldn't normally do it flat, I think. You just play. It's just like a toy.
Like a slinky.
Yeah, it is. I've got lots of plans to do lots of things with these, just about getting motivated to do them. Okay, so concertina fold is a very common and easy structure to do. Let's have a look at the next one. This is just playful. This is color-coded, so that should tell you that it was during COVID, because didn't everyone color code something just for something to do? So this is an artist book. It could have photos in it. It doesn't. I was playing around with acrylics and doing monoprints, and instead of, putting them in a shoebox somewhere and not looking at it again and eventually throwing them out, I just made them into a book. And it's very much a sculptural book, and it's about colour. And that binding, it's a really good, solid binding for a book, is Coptic. Yeah. Okay, let's go to number 5. All right, this one you may have seen in the promotion for this talk. We're looking at the larger book there on the left. It's approximately A4 size, just under actually. And there you can see it on the table. There are 2 stories in this book, depending where you stand. If you stand at one end, you look down, you'll see the patterns of place in my local neighbourhood. And if you stand at the other end, you'll see the people and mood of the Fortitude Valley, which is where I shot this, again, just on my phone when I was walking. This is also, as you can see, a concertina fold. It's double-sided, but I did not print this one at home. All those others so far I've printed at home, but this one was printed by a professional printer on 2 long strips of paper, because it's double-sided but not printed double-sided. So I constructed the book double-sided with 2 strips. I hope that makes sense. It's called Fortitude because the local area is called Fortitude Valley. And this was for an exhibition for a camera club. Yep. Okay. And you can see around the wall, everyone else put their images up on the wall, and I think they're allowed 6 maximum. But in my book, a small detail, there are 22 images. You know, I got the same space allocation. So a book can be more interesting, I think, because you can have more in it. The story on the back is similar. There's 2 ways of looking at it. It's also about people and patterns of place. I'm going to show you some images a bit closer up of this one. I entered this book in my very first photo book competition with a fairly traditional photo group. And I have to say that part of my thinking was, would this traditional photo group actually even accept a handmade book? Because I knew it would be pretty different from what they were used to. And they'd be used to beautiful images and beautifully bound books done through an online provider.
Yeah.
And not only did they accept it, but it actually won the first prize in storytelling.
Wow.
The other category that they had was portfolio. So that's a different type of book. That's when you have all your great images in. But I don't do that. I'm more interested in a local story or something more personal. So to say I was surprised is an understatement that it was so successful.
Well, we're not surprised.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I do want to say about all these handmade books, they're perfectly imperfect. That's the whole point. And if you expected more than that, you probably mightn't be for you. Yeah. Because no matter how hard I'm quite neat when I'm doing this, it's never perfect. But that's what I love about it. Here's a couple more images. And that's just showing that same book in different format. So again, you can display it differently. I've found that the concertina structure is the best for display. All right, so we'll move on to number 6. Oh, this is a small book in a slipcase, that's called. And I made this in 2020. And I had done many prototypes, strong word, but I'd done many that didn't work. And finally I got this one. I wanted it to display it well, but I wanted it, and most of the structures I was using weren't working, but this is what I eventually did. So it slips out like that. Now I'm going to show you some pages from this small book in a slipcase, and each diagram is 2 pages. So let's take the third one along. That's a page there with the black background, and that's a page here. And these are some of my early street images that we do when we're just beginning. And I don't know, if you look hard enough, you'll see they're diptychs. And I wonder where I got that idea from. So the images are paired. So if I take this one here, that's one image and another that I've paired. And the same with all of them. They were all taken without any intent for this book. That's usually how I work. So I think you call that a retrospective selection of images for a book. I find it really hard to do it forward thinking with intent. I just capture what I get, and then I go through and find things that relate. So let me show you. This book can be hung, and that's one side of it. And I did print this at home. It's quite laborious, but the printing was. And the covers are perspex. And this is the other side, literally the other side. One's abstract. I think I was trying to mimic in a way what I did with that earlier book where I had 2 stories. So that was in my mind. So that on the right, it's the abstract version of diptychs. And then this is a snake binding. And also it's quite playful too. So there's some ways you can arrange it. And it's quite confusing to put together, even for me. And I made it. So it's got a little bit of interest, and it's quite sturdy, very sturdy sewing to hold it together. And I think the perspex cover allows you to see the images either side, and you can fold it so that you can have the abstract showing, or you can have the other side showing. And remember how small the little slipcase was that it could sit in. Again, it can come out, you can hang it. I hang it sometimes. And usually, interestingly, I usually hang the abstract side. I think it's a much better layout. And here's the last book. Now, this is the one I mentioned that is self-published through an online provider. So it's a traditional book bound in a way that probably many of you have done. And it's a very personal story. And I put this in to remind me to tell you that in the end, it doesn't matter what format your book is, whether it's handmade or self-published or whatever structure it is, because in the end, it's how people feel when they peruse the book. And this was the case with this one. This is a kind of bland, colourless, small, uninteresting book to look at from the outside, but a very personal story inside. So it's 22 centimetres by 15 centimetres, so it's really quite small.
Yeah.
And it won the following year's that same competition. I was even more surprised by that. So that means that it doesn't matter what structure you do. It's the content of the book and the flow and what the story is. So Okay, so that's the end of the books. Any questions?
So we might ask people to just type the questions in, if that's possible. I'll just start with a question, Lou. So with the binding, I think for me that's the hardest thing to get my head around. Do you sew them all?
Yeah, sometimes they're sewed. In the next topic, I'll just show you briefly some of the tools, but some aren't sewn, some are just glued.
Okay. And where do you learn how to glue them? Is that something?
Well, when I learned, I got one of the first book I showed tonight I made in 2005, and I know that because it's written on the book. That's the only way I remember. I went to a studio. I loved books. I love the look of books, and I love paper, and I love slicing up paper. And I just loved, I didn't even need to put anything in the book. But now I think YouTube is your best friend. Yeah. I think there are probably thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of, if you put flag book in, there'll be a tutorial on it for sure.
Okay.
If you put concertina in, I'll just show you in the next section a few of the elements of a concertina structure. Okay. But yeah, YouTube now. Okay. And there are books.
Okay. So Beck, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do have some questions, Lou. So where are we? So Marie was asking, how do you hang the snake-bound book?
Yes, good. Okay. And the one you've got on the screen now is also a snake-bound book, and it's my footies, just in case you wanted to see the silliness of them. I have a hanging system in my place where I can hang artwork from hooks that are not in the wall. So I just hang it in a fairly unsophisticated way with clips. That's as simple as it is, because it doesn't stay up for very long.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have a hanging system, you could just put some command hooks temporarily up on the wall and hang it. Just needs two.
Yeah.
The next question is from Sue, is how do you find out about all the different book types?
Okay, as in the structures? Well, when I was doing classes a long time ago, that's where I learned them. And I guess I have samples at home, and I couldn't remember the names of some of them. So I just went on into YouTube as to Google different book types. I also have a few books at home that from those days. And I think you'll find in most, if you found a handmade book, not a necessarily handmade photo book, because I don't think there are that many people that do handmade photo books, I think. But handmade books, artist books are really common and beautiful. And so I'm at the stage where I'm trying to find other constructions that I could do to put my photos in that are kind of art-like books, photo books. But so I'd say just Google bookbinding techniques, handmade bookbinding, handmade books, book arts, artist books, and just see what they are. They usually describe what it is, and you'll find the names there. So tonight we've looked at flag, concertina, snake binding. And I think really, I'm just looking at the books I've got here. That's pretty much what I've used so far. Oh, and Coptic binding, which is more of it for a journal, for a standard book. I think I've got a photo coming up of that too. So Google and YouTube. Okay. Save you going to a studio.
Lou, we've also had a few questions about paper. So is there a specific type of paper that you use, especially for the photography books? Yeah, and what kind of paper do you use?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was even thinking that might come up. So the Fortitude book, which is probably the display book for the exhibition, that is photographic paper, and it's about 190 GSM. So for a concertina fold, you need some paper that's got a little bit of hold in it. And it's 190 GSM, but there's 2 strips of it, because it's double-sided. So yes, you do need stronger paper, any printmaking paper, and any strong watercolor paper. So about 200 GSM. But you can also make it on. You can do it with anything, and if it doesn't work, you'll know that it might be the paper weight, but also the type of paper. So sometimes this paper of this book that's in front of you now, that was printed at home, and that is on a photographic paper. I think it's an Epson, and it's probably about 180 or 190 GSM, so a little bit of strength in it, more certainly than your normal photocopy paper. But I think from memory, I used offcuts of matte board from the framer, and I glued or double taped the image I printed out onto the matte board to give it some strength, some resilience.
Krishna, there's quite a few questions here. Krishna is just asked, will you be letting us know a bit more about the stitching in the next sections, or?
I can not particularly. No, there's one stitch that I'll refer to, and you could check it out. It's hard to do in this format.
Google it.
It's really a hands-on, learn by doing. So I'm just showing you the images. If you get sick of the images, just rest your eyes by closing them if there's too many images. This snake binding, it really is as simple, and I can barely sew a button on. So if I can do this, anybody can do it. There's nothing special about it. This stitching here, like there's a hole there and a hole, you can work to a template. Use templates a lot so you get the holes in the same place. It's quite basic. This
is from Sari. Do you see all of your books as one-offs, or do you ever make multiple editions of your handmade books?
Yes. I see mine as one-off. I do them for me, for fun. I enjoy the activity. Some I make, I never look at again. It's really for the process for me that I enjoy. But if you were doing multiple editions, limited editions, 10 or 15 or whatever, you'd probably need to use an outside printer, a person to print it for you. And for me, it's just easier doing one off at home for me. I enjoy that, but many people do, especially people from the printmaking world. They will have made a series of prints, and they'll print them off themselves on the press. That's the whole art of printmaking. And then they'll bind them individually, and you'll number them 1 out of 15, 2 out of 15. So I generally don't do that.
Yeah. And Diane has asked, where do you buy your materials from to make them?
Okay, my materials, as in the papers, usually from a good art supply shop. Sometimes I'll transfer my photos through photographic transfer onto paper, and that paper needs to be probably printmaking paper because it needs to be able to absorb moisture. And you get them. I'm going to show you some tools soon. most things you can buy online, or if you've got a art shop or a supply shop, some things in Australia, we've got Spotlight, Officeworks, just the everyday kind of stationery shops can work. And probably people on YouTube who do their videos, tutorials, can probably tell you too.
Okay.
But nothing is hard to get now.
Marie's asked, are the individual strips in the snake book interconnected?
Oh, yes, that's good. So they are a little bit, but you can see in this example that they're not, they've got to be able to be folded. So this can fold down to here. I've got my cursor working. Can you see it?
Yes, yes, you can.
Okay. So this folds. So this one isn't connected. This isn't connected at this level, but it's connected down here. So this folds down and across on top and goes up and across and down and across. So they're connected at the ends, but not all the way through. So that ends up being folded up into one little box.
Wow.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, she said thanks. And one more question. How much time would it take you to make a book?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a bit like how long's a piece of string. When I've made a book that hasn't been successful, so I've tried another structure and another one, like I did with the Fortitude book. I tried a few structures before that. The making of the book in the end didn't take too long because I'd spent over weeks or months even sorting through the images to try and get a successful structure. So the more time you have with the images, the less time it takes to make a handmade book. With that book that I called I'm Not Me Anymore, the self-published book, that took me 6 hours from beginning to end when I did it through the online provider.
Yeah.
That's not very long. But I've thrown them out because, you know, can't keep 3 or 4 different variations of that book trying to do a handmade book, and it didn't work. So I was able to do that book very quickly, but I'd spent weeks. I was driving myself crazy trying to work out which way I was going to do it to tell the best story. And the best story actually was told by that self-published book through the online provider, traditional book. Sometimes they can take over a month. It might take me over a month doing a little bit each day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Lou, we might move on. I'm just conscious of.
Okay, let's go. Yep. All right, so I wanted to talk to you more specifically about the concertina fold. It's also called the accordion fold if you're going to look it up. And that's just to remind you on the left, that's the book Fortitude. This is what you need to, this is what the concertina fold looks like. So it's full of, they call them mountains and valleys, or maybe hills and valleys, up and down. There are 2 cover boards and then your art, however you choose to put your art in it. In that case, I think they were self-portraits, and it was an experiment I was doing at an art class last year. And it was photographic transfer, where you reverse the image when you print it, and then you use a chemical that I don't know the name. It was just a chemical that we had access to. And you scrape the back of the image with a pencil, and you get a variation. Now, in terms of perfect photographs, not at all. It's like an art. It's like a variation. It's and I did put some monoprints in there, so it's sort of different. But 2 boards. For boards, you can use old book covers. I use grey board usually, which is acid-free, and you can also use matte board. I mentioned earlier, you can also use matte board. If it's not thick enough, you can laminate. You can put 2 layers of matte board offcuts from the framers for your boards, or you can use those little canvas art pieces. They're little tiny canvases that you can paint on. You can use those as well if you wish. I've seen people do that. You can make that as long as you like. So even though the bit of paper I had wasn't that long, I just joined it somewhere in there. There's a hinge join, and you use the same paper and you do it. And I'm sure that'll be, you can Google that too, or on YouTube, there'll be how to do a hinge joint. So there's no stitching in that at all, just gluing. And I like Aquid here. It dries clear. There are lots of glues you can use. If you're traveling and you want to make a book on the go, just a glue stick is great. And double-sided tape works, but I find over time that can, especially in the heat where I live, that won't be sustainable, but it's great for a while. So we talked a bit about paper before. Because it's standing upright, this paper is probably 180 GSM, but you can get up to 300, like watercolorists will have paper at 300 GSM or even more, so it can stand up. Now, this was the book you saw earlier. This is a flag book, just to give you another perspective on it. It was this one. So you see there's a concertina fold in that. There's cover boards. There's no stitching. They're all glued on. And you can see down here, they're glued on one line one way, then the other back the other, and so on. That's quite a heavy book, which I've just got here. It makes a great noise. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
It's heavy as. Yeah. Now, I got those images printed from an online provider, and I just chopped them up. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. So here are the basic tools. I left out needles. You need tapestry needles. I use tapestry needles for the sewing if I do the sewing, and I'm going to show you some sewing next. So you have here wax linen thread. That's really important. The wax is really important. You can get linen thread and wax it yourself. Oh, not for me. I'll just buy the wax linen thread. Not cheap now, and I always used to buy it from England or the US, but I think some places stock it now. If you've got a strong bookbinding guild in your city or where you live, or access to one, then often they'll sell this, but it's really, really good. What's that?
Spotlight. Not from Spotlight.
No, they might, and leather binding places might, but this is beautiful. And this is, the colours in the range are beautiful. That's an awl. That's what puts the holes in the cardboard covers or wherever you're putting holes in, so that keeps them a consistent size. Bone folder is pretty important. That helps crease the paper without bruising it. My favourite, the blunt knife. I think they call it a cobbler's knife, but any blunt knife really. And that's to cut the paper. You slice it rather than using a guillotine, or where you get really straight edge. When you slice it, if it's beautiful paper, it has little bits of raggedy edge, which is beautiful. The other things are pretty obvious. The Aquid here. And don't forget the needles and a cutting board, of course. Steel knife helps, and you've got to really protect your fingers, especially your thumb, because you'll have a few cuts eventually. Yeah. All right, so here's another concertina. I think this is the last one. This stitching is pamphlet stitch, and you can see the cover boards. You can see the concertina fold, that's the black. I think that might have been an Arch paper, A-R-C-H. Oh, I think there's an E. It's a watercolour paper, and it's a high quality one. So I think it's art. Anyway, you would only have to ask in an art shop. So that, if you look at the right, you can see I've just put folded paper with images on them into each of the valley and sewn it with a pamphlet stitch, and it's so simple. It's probably what was used originally when people were doing cheap pamphlets. That's what I imagine anyway. If there is a history about it, I don't know what it is, or I've forgotten. But it's a really easy, that's always use wax linen thread. The waxing gives it a resistance, which is really important and helps keep it knotted. And the cover on that is bookbinding cover that I got from a bookbinder online. I haven't used that much before. You can use scraps of wallpaper too for covers. It's really good. Japanese paper is beautiful for covers because your cover and your glue have kind of got to get on well. They've got to be in a good relationship. Otherwise, you'll get patches of glue marks, and you always do a test with your paper. Some Nepalese papers that I brought home from Nepal haven't worked so well, and others do, so it's trial and error. All right, so any questions at this stage?
Any questions, anybody? Just type them in. Lou, I've just got one to start. So with the covers, you either buy them from a bookmaker or somewhere. Can you buy those online as well at set sizes?
Well, I don't know. You can go to a secondhand bookshop. You can buy cheap books or throwaway books and use those covers, recycle them. I always use grey board, and because I know I like it, I just like to do that. Grey board is available from an art shop. It's acid-free.
Okay.
Grey, Grey. Yeah, some places it's called straw board. Straw board.
Okay.
And I cut it to size. So the covers are usually a little bit bigger than the pages.
Yeah.
And I always do the covers last, cutting them. I use paper. So for this book here on this page, that's like a general diary. It's the size that the paper naturally folds to, because measuring drives me insane. I mean, you have to measure some things, but the large sheets of paper that I fold up and just cut with the blunt knife, I'll make the book the size of that paper in this case. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can also use mat board from the framers for a cover.
Okay.
And sometimes the offcuts are a little bit weak, I suppose, so you can glue two together, press them down, and you've got a thicker cover.
Okay. And you just use the awl to put the holes in?
Yeah, so see the holes here?
Yeah.
You need a strong awl to get through that. If that might be a 3mm or 2.5mm cover, and you need a strong awl, you do it by hand, and you need a strong awl to get through that.
Okay.
And then your needle has to be able to fit in that hole as well. So I think tapestry size 18 or 20 or even 22. I think they're the range of needle sizes I've always been told to use. Yeah. So it's quite a big needle, but it needs to go through. Now, also in every paper fold there for this binding, I've used an awl because I sew through the awl, sew through the holes that the awls make.
Okay.
I mean, you're not going to learn Coptic. It took me ages you're not going to learn Coptic. You just know the name, look it up. There'll be tutorials on it for sure. And you can see on the inside here in this book, that's where I've stitched. And I use, in this book, just for interest, there's 6 needles. So this is done on its own. There's no cross. This is done. These two are done as a pair. I'm moving on the left image. And there's a needle at each end of the thread. And that's why over here you see it like this.
Okay.
That's like a 2-day workshop doing Coptic from scratch. Yeah, not 10 minutes on Zoom. Yeah.
No.
Any other questions before I go to the last one?
No, there are no other questions, so we might move on to the next,
Yeah.
the last section.
Okay, so Julia asked me to do something about image editing. I said earlier, it's not about Lightroom, it's about your selection and sequencing. And there's another S word that goes first. Does anyone want to say, yell out anything? I know you're all on mute, but
You can
anyway,
unmute and yell it out.
it's sort. It's sort.
Good.
So I jumped the gun just so we can keep moving. So the 3 S's, sort, select, and sequence. I'm sure many of you are familiar with definitely select and sequence, but I like to sort. So this image is just I don't take many photos of it. It's because it's a messy process. I don't even think about grabbing shots. But this is one of the books I made, and I fiddled around for weeks and weeks trying to work out. I should say I print every image. So when I'm sorting, I might print 100 images that might have potential to be in a photo book. That's whether it's self-published through an online provider, traditional book, or a handmade book. I just get cheap prints, 6x4s, and I put them on the kitchen bench. And I always do that. And I recommend that, especially if you're wanting to pair or you want to flow. If you're just doing a memory book from a holiday you did, well, I call it a memory book. It's a trip book. If you're doing a memory book, I wouldn't probably print everything. But if I'm trying to do a book that's a little bit different, that has a story that's perhaps a bit abstract or a bit conceptual, then I'll print everything. Yeah, and especially if I'm doing diptychs or trying to do any pairing or any flow, I'll definitely do that. I can never do them in this order. I might sort and select, and I'll sort, and then I'll go and do a bit of sequencing, and then I've got nothing here. I've got to go back and select, or I'll go back. I can never do them in order. I do all of those things all the time. There's no right way to do it. You just do the best you can, and you see how it comes. And I do a lot of it intuitively. I haven't even thought about a lot of it. Now, that's an example when I was putting a footies book together. They are cheap prints on my kitchen bench, and I luckily took a photo because I then worked from that, right? So that's one thing. That's the printing. Here's another one. This book didn't work out, but I was at a studio and I took photos. It didn't work out because I was trying to do handmade and the flow wasn't right. When you turned the page, I printed this at home and it wasn't working at all. But eventually the snake book was the result. Okay. So, when someone asked how long does it take, that was over quite a few months till I got something that I was happy with. All right, so this is some design steps I'll go through quickly. I'm sure if you've made a photo book, you've probably thought about these things too. First of all, what's the purpose? For me, my purpose is to tell a story of some sort, and I think street is fabulous for that because it can be conceptual and thematic and can be more interesting than, say, one of my memory books, which is just a collection of images from when I went to, I don't know, anywhere. Uzbekistan, I've got a book, or Turkey, I've got a book. They're different sorts of books. So what's your purpose? And then you go through the 3 S's. And while you're doing that, everyone will tell you less is more for the end result. Less is more. I don't separate sort and sequence from sort and select from sequence, have them all together. And like I say, it's not in order. I think you've got to think about the size of your book. I made a book some time ago. It led up to the Fortitude book. It was a little bit like that flag book, that long flag book with the architectural abstracts. And it does not fit in to any bookcase I have. And it drives me crazy. So I don't love it. I wish I did. I'm going to remake it. I decided I'm going to remake it so it fits in. So for me, that's a practical measure. Also talking about the size of your images and your layouts. In the book, I like to have to be surprised in a way when I do a photo book. I'm not predictable. Each page is the same, but it's so personal. Really, you just got to work out what works for you. And a good bit of advice is to get a book that you have, perhaps done by someone else, if you've never made one. And what is it about that book that you love? And look at all these things in it. This is key. This is something I've learned in recent years. White space. Your eyes got to have a rest. And we often jam so much into our photo books that there's no space for the eye to rest. So one image on a page might be enough, or a small image on a page so that there's white space before introducing more images again. But variation and variety key for me. This is important. It's very personal. Text and font or type. What do you think is appropriate for the story you're telling? Again, look at a photo book that you have, that you love, and see what they've done. You've got to think about your cover and your finishes. And you're looking for consistency and connection and flow in the end. That's what you're looking for in the storytelling photo book anyway.
Yeah.
Not so much for others, but for storytelling photo book. And back to where we're finished. They're finished. So I'll just quickly review. You saw a little inside this book a little bit. You saw this one.
Mm-hmm.
You saw the snake book. You saw the architectural flag book, that one. And this is the fortitude book here. And over here, you saw a tiny little bit in that little book, I'm Not Me Anymore. And these are just other books with photos in them of different sorts. Okay,
Wonderful.
That's it. We're done.
Fantastic. Okay. So questions, we might just sort of open it up now. So if you'd like to just ask a question, just unmute and ask it. Maybe Lou, if you stop sharing your screen,
Yep.
we can see everybody. That would be great. Okay. So, who has a question? Don't be shy.
I did have, but you answered it, Lou. I was going to ask whether you print everything beforehand in order to sort it and sequence it, but you do. And do you normally get that done commercially cheaply rather than printed yourself?
I've done both, but it's so much easier just to go to, well, in our case, Officeworks and cheap prints. Yeah, for sure. I've got boxes of them, just that I've used, and I chop them up sometimes, throw them out eventually, but they're really good help. Yeah, recommend that. But always cheap ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? I think you answered this, Lou, but I just can't remember. So with the concertina book, you get it printed in a long strip, right? And that's from the printer they use a roll, so you can print it as long as you like. And then you have to cut each image up, or you fold
I didn't. I just used I used the bone folder.
Okay.
You have to measure. I used the bone folder to score, is the correct phrase they use, to score that long paper. And then it was a bit challenging because I had two strips, and I know it's not ideal, but I wanted it double-sided. That was more important than the mess I might create by trying to score two strips. But equally, you can join concertina folds with a hinge, with using the same paper. But in the Fortitude book that was printed, that was 2 strips. But what I did do, I got 2 lots done in case I stuffed up the first one.
Yeah. And so the Fortitude book, are they do they have anything in between those 2 layers, or they're just glued front and back to each other?
No, nothing in between. They are I could separate them. That was a difficult decision. I wasn't quite sure how I'd handle that. I just worked it out as I went.
Yeah.
They are both glued in at the cover. So they're attached at the cover.
Okay. But not so the strip's not glued together, just connected at the cover.
Yeah, I'm just getting it out just to have a look. I can't remember really. I'll just do it quickly.
So in some ways that would be easy to.
Can you see? That's between, that's the book. Let me just check. I might have put some glue. No.
Okay.
It goes all the way along.
Yeah.
But I pressed it, like, I put heavy books on it. Once you score it and flatten it, put weight on it, and that was the biggest issue with the way it stood. Was it going to hold its position? And luckily it did. And over time, good paper behaves very well. Cheaper paper, not so. Yeah.
So you could potentially publish more than one version of that.
Absolutely, of that.
Down. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, you could. And I think if you put is it an IBSN number? I think if you do like really formal and you do, they're called a colophon. That's the text you put on about how the book was made, how many copies there are, what's the paper weight, and all of that. I think it can even, in Queensland and our state library, we have a beautiful collection of artist books. I think Melbourne Library does too.
Yeah.
It depends pretty much on who's been involved in those states. And we've got a lovely collection, but you can't just go and look at them. You've got to fill in a form, give notice, say which books you want, which is hard when you don't know what's there, and they'll bring them out, and then it's white gloves because they're quite precious. Yeah.
Lou, with paper, is it a bit like fabric? Is there a right side and a wrong side, and is there a weave that's best used for how you fold the paper and how you cover it?
There's a grain. They talk about grain.
Yes.
Yeah. And so if you squeeze a piece of paper and it's harder to fold, don't squeeze, that's not right. Fold it, but without creasing it. If you fold it and you feel a tension in it more than the other way, then you know which way the grain is. And same with grey board. You want your cover, you don't want it to curl over time. So all of these, I would have used the covers or the paper with the grain running down the same way where you score.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
That's sort of what you get into when you're actually face to face. We should have a workshop.
Well, it's coming from a dress. My mother was a dressmaker, so it's easy for me to think about it in those terms, and I just wondered.
Yeah, that's certainly important. Yeah, the better the paper, the more forgiving it is if you go against the grain. But if you know it, why would you go against the grain? Yeah, there'd have to be a good.
You always work with the grain, and you have to know what the grain is, though.
Yeah, but you just do that by feel and touch.
Yeah.
And if you get a piece of grey board, you do you move it and you can feel which way work, and I mark it up with pencil.
Yep.
The grey book, because it comes in large sheets, mark it up, and then I know which way the grain is, because once you cut bits off for your covers, if you've got pencil marks, it makes it easier to remember. Yeah.
I'll hold you to that. Let's do a workshop.
Okay. We'll have a play day.
I think we have
Okay.
lots of takers, Lou.
Lou,
Look, I just do it for fun. Yeah. Sorry, Angela.
yeah, no, that's okay. Lou, thank you very much for sharing all those inspirational stories. For an absolute beginner who's just starting out, and I like to apply the KISS symbol of keep it simple. If I was to just experiment and play, no pressure, would you suggest something like 10 prints, choose a particular style, and then buy the necessary pieces of equipment and paper and just play?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't even have to put a number on it. Just go and buy some cheap paper and just fold it up into a concertina. Just practice that. And they'll show you online, I'm sure, how to do that. And then you could even print photos at the cheap, at Officeworks, and then stick them on.
Yeah.
Right,
Just
okay.
stick them into the concertina and make some covers out of an old book or some. Don't even have to cover it. Yeah, you'll get the feel.
Yeah, just because sometimes we can have high expectations of producing an A-grade product, and it's just about the process and having fun and seeing what your hands are capable of doing, what your mind's capable of doing, what your visuals like as well. Yeah, okay, thanks for that. That was great.
Absolutely. Yes. And you don't even need fancy, you don't need the thread to do a basic concertina. I mean, you don't need to buy a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, good luck. Have fun.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions? Any more messages, Beck, that you need to read out? You're muted.
She's muted.
Yeah. I don't think there's any new questions, but there's lots of thank yous on the messages, Lou, from different people, and just saying how fascinating it was and interesting and creative, and yeah. You can have a look later.
I hope someone like Angela just said, just give it a go.
Yeah.
Fabulous, Lou. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, well, we might wrap it up, Lou. That was fantastic, and thank you so much for putting all those slides together and taking all the images. It was so beautifully done, just like your books.
You're welcome.
So
thank you.
Very, very, very grateful and appreciative that you've done that. So, and I'm sure you'd have lots of interest in workshops for sure. So
Yeah,
maybe.
Okay, well, we might wrap it up. So we haven't had, this is our first session since we did the review session with Polly back in February, but we'd like to sort of keep going, and we'd really like some ideas of what people would like us to do. So more review sessions, for example. We were also thinking of doing another photo slam that was very popular when we did that back in 2020. Quite a few of us are going traveling towards the end of the year, so we might actually maybe try and do something online. Maybe Debrani and Lou and Linda and I can do something in India when we're there, in Kolkata, or maybe we can do something in Istanbul for the people who are coming to Istanbul. So yeah, lots of possibilities over the next few months. But if there's anything specific that you would like us to focus on or, you know, do again, then please let us know.
Yep.
Just on Facebook Messenger, Facebook, or in the Instagram feed. So, okay, we might wrap that up. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And enjoy the rest of your day in the Northern Hemisphere and in South Asia. And we're ready for bed at our end. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for organising it. Anyone else who was responsible. I was so looking forward to it, and I'm glad I participated. It was very good. Thanks, Lou.
Thanks, Angela. Okay, bye.